Welcome back to our revision series for the Power and Conflict anthology. In this video, we will be revising Carol Rumens' powerful poem, The Émigrée. The Émigrée explores themes of memory, identity, and the experience of exile through the nostalgic eyes of someone forced to leave their homeland as a child. Despite conflict and political upheaval, the speaker's childhood memories remain radiant, idealized by the warmth of childhood innocence. But in a way that's more troubling, because it's almost as though she is questioning how real these memories are. And then obviously it makes the loss of that home country all the more potent if her childhood memories are so idyllic. As usual, we will read the poem, we'll think a bit about its context, we'll annotate it, paying attention to language and form, and finally we'll think about which other poems in the Power and Conflict anthology you could compare it to. By the end, you'll have a comprehensive understanding of this poem to enable you to approach your exam with confidence, so make sure you stay until the end. There once was a country, I left it as a child, but my memory of it is sunlight clear. For it seems I never saw it in that November, which I am told comes to the mildest city. The worst news I receive of it cannot break my original view, the bright filled paper weight. It may be at war, it may be sick with tyrants, but I am branded by an impression of sunlight. The white streets of that city, the graceful slopes glow even clearer as time rolls its tanks, and the frontiers rise between us, close like waves. That child's vocabulary I carried here like a hollow doll opens and spills a grammar. Soon I shall have every coloured molecule of it. It may by now be a lie, banned by the state, but I can't get it off my tongue. It tastes of sunlight. I have no passport. There's no way back at all, but my city comes to me in its own white plane. It lies down in front of me, docile as paper. I comb its hair and love its shining eyes. My city takes me dancing through the city of walls. They accuse me of absence. They circle me. They accuse me of being dark in their free city. My city hides behind me. They mutter death, and my shadow falls as evidence of sunlight. So, what is happening in this poem? This poem explores the powerful and emotional experience of exile and displacement through the eyes of someone who left their homeland as a child. It captures the speaker's idealized memories of their homeland, filled with vivid imagery of sunlight, purity, and innocence, despite knowing now that the homeland is marked by tyranny, war, and oppression. The poem contrasts these idealized, cherished memories against the harsh realities, political instability, conflicts, and isolation. The poem emphasizes how memories can preserve hope and identity, even when one is disconnected from one's homeland. The repeated motif of sunlight symbolizes optimism, resilience, and unwavering attachment to one's roots, despite external hardships and separation. Carol Rumens published The Émigrée in 1993 at a time of global political instability, with people often fleeing their countries because of war or oppression. Although the poem doesn't specify a particular place, this ambiguity allows Rumens to explore the universal experience of displacement and longing. I once heard it's also a metaphor for one's childhood, and we all can empathise with that, this looking back on a past nostalgic and idealised and better perhaps than it really was. Let's annotate the poem. So we have this opening, there once was a country, which establishes quite a storytelling, nostalgic tone. And that's heightened by the word once. Because when I say once to you in this context, what do you think of? You think about once upon a time, don't you? And so you have these fairy tale connotations. And that is building the sense of idealized memory. Once upon a time, what we associate with childhood, when stories are magical and we believe in everything. And that opening, it establishes that. We'll have these layers of memory throughout the poem. And although she left it as a child, her memory of it is sunlight clear. there is a repeated motif of sunlight throughout the poem. And we'll discuss more about it going forward, but obviously just what do we associate with sunlight? It tends to symbolise warmth and hope, doesn't it? The worst news of it, this country that she grew up in, so the worst news she receives of it, it cannot break her original view, and that's enjambed, when the line of poetry trickles over to the next line without any punctuation. And really, throughout this, you have that tension, this contrast between the present grim reality at war, sick with tyrants, and the past idealised, idyllic memory and the nostalgic memories. And there is that tension that runs throughout the poem, this contrast of what she remembers her homeland to be versus what it has become, it's implied. We have that repeated, it may be at war, it may be sick with tyrants, and that emphasises the politically unstable place it has become. This last line of the stanza is really crucial though. I'm branded by an impression of sunlight. There's so much to unpack here. First of all, I just want to point out, as we go forward, and this will be a structural point, the last word of every stanza is sunlight. And that's a very deliberate choice of the poet. Often the last word of a stanza, or of indeed a whole poem, is very important. But this idea of being branded by an impression of sunlight, you have a distinct juxtaposition there. And remember, when things are juxtaposing, they're placed next to one another to highlight the difference between this. Because you have the negative, violent connotations of branded. When you think of something being branded, you think of it being burnt, a mark seared onto the skin. And then you have the more positive connotations of an impression of sunlight. And as we've said, sunlight symbolises hope, warmth, light. So that tension that I mentioned, that contrast, that's encapsulated in this juxtaposition of the last line of the first stanza. So you have the violent connotations of branded. And also, what does that link to? It links to the idea of identity. If you're branded by something, you're marked, and your identity is indicated without even necessarily you having given permission of that. You can't escape it. So she can't escape her roots. And this idea of an impression of sunlight, an impression is a mark that's left behind. It's a faint, fading, sometimes indistinct trace of something that has been there before. And what has been there before for her was real life. It was where she grew up. But there's a cruelty in it being an impression of sunlight because it is now a memory. And obviously, memories can be somewhat unreliable, especially the younger we are. Human memory as we age, we're not like computers. It's not distinct and clear cut. Our memories tend to fade with time, and it captures that sense of a fading memory that isn't wholly reliable. She can't know how faithful her memories are, and there is a cruelty about that. They're an impression. They're not substantial. They're a trace of real life that has been left behind and that fade over time. And then that idyllic image, white streets, graceful slopes. It's painting a very idyllic image of her home city. And then, as we say, you've got this metaphor of time rolling its tanks by. There's a lot we could read into that metaphor, but it does highlight the unstoppability of time. It highlights that idea of time rolling by and us being unable to stop it. And that links back to all these ideas of memory in the first stanza. That child's vocabulary I carried here like a hollow doll. That is a really interesting simile that we could say a lot about. She focuses on language here in her mother tongue. Identity is a central theme to this poem, and one's language really defines in a way one's identity as well. So that child's vocabulary I carried here, that idea of metaphorically carrying her language with her, but it being like a hollow doll. Hollow, if something is hollow, it is empty. There's nothing in it. There's no substance to it. And it being a hollow doll, a doll is a toy, a plaything. It's highlighting potentially how this child's vocabulary, this mother tongue she carried with her, is of no use to her. It is as useless as a hollow, empty toy of a child. And obviously there's a cruelty to that because, as I say, your language is bound up with your identity. And if your mother tongue, your first language, is rendered completely useless, that leaves you questioning your identity. And obviously she is questioning her identity quite a lot throughout the poem. And so we know it may now be a lie and banned by the state. Censorship, she is not allowed to use her language, hence why it has become like a hollow doll. But she can't get it off her tongue, and it tastes of sunlight. That idea of being branded by sunlight we come back to. So she can't escape her language. She can't forget her language. And again, it tasting of sunlight, it's that childhood nostalgia shining through again. Just as she's branded by that impression of sunlight of her memories, her mother tongue, the traces of her old language, they taste of sunlight, they taste of something better, they remind her of something better. There's a lot of sensory imagery throughout the poem, this idea of tasting, of being branded. It sharpens that sense of memory because obviously we are immersed in our senses, and so by including those senses, she's making those memories more immersive. And throughout this, have no passport, again, that idea of identity that keeps cropping throughout the poem, how much we're defined by our roots, how much we're defined by our childhood memories, but to have no passport. And throughout this, all this personification, it consolidates how much the memories of the city mean to her. This idea of it lying down before her and her combing and caring and nurturing her memory of these cities. It's really emphasizing how endearing that place is to her. We then have these they, and that repeated they is quite ominous because we wonder, who are they? Are they these tyrants that are mentioned in the first stanza, being sick with tyrants? Remember, a tyrant is someone who exercises a harsh, punitive rule over their people, an unjust rule over their people. And the city, or the memory of her city, hides behind her. It cowers in the face of this mysterious they, of these tyrants. And that final, my shadow falls as evidence of sunlight again. We've had that as the last word of each stanza, and now it's the last word of the poem itself. What does this metaphor mean? It reminds that it was once a beautiful place, evidence of sunlight. It once had sunlight. The metaphor reminds that her homeland was once a beautiful place. Her shadow, even though shadow has negative connotations, but it's evidence that sunlight existed there, that there was sunshine, there was hope, there was light in this place she once called home. And so that actually, even though you have this ominous they, the memories of her homeland cannot ever be taken from her. She is branded by them for better or for worse. And so you could see this as a hopeful ending to the poem, depending, because actually, obviously, she can't get there anymore. She has no passport. She cannot return to her homeland, but her memories themselves can never be taken. It depends how much hope you want to draw from that. But throughout, the idea of identity is central to this poem, and the speaker grappling with her sense of identity after being displaced from her home country. Interestingly, I once heard that this whole poem could be a metaphor for lost childhood. That would be a very interesting interpretation. If you don't want to interpret it as very literal and the speaker having been displaced as an exile from their home country, that's quite an interesting interpretation to explore that actually applies to lost childhood, because that sense of being both detached from and drawn by these memories that form the bedrock of your identity, and that tension there that you can't always fully rely on those memories to be completely accurate and completely faithful to reality, it underlines the whole poem, this theme of identity. What defines us? Is it our homeland? Is it our language? Some interesting questions raised by this poem about identity. And in terms of power and conflict, the power that one's homeland can have over one, and how that can cause an inner conflict into what defines us, what gives us our identity. On to structure. Like many of these past poems we've looked at, the Emigrée is written in free verse, which means it doesn't have a specific rhyming pattern or a regular meter. This could echo the chaotic experience of Displacement. Additionally, that reference of sunlight in every last stanza of the poem, and mentioned throughout the poem, gives it coherence and perhaps symbolises hope. So, which poems from the anthology could you potentially compare the Émigrée to? You could compare it to Checking Out Me History, because you can discuss that role of cultural identity and the power of memory. You could compare it to War Photographer, to explore differing responses to conflict and suffering. Or pair it with Kamikaze, to examine themes of exile, identity, and conflicting loyalty. And that's it. We're nearly at the end of the series, but I hope this was helpful. Have a look at my other videos on the poems if you did find it helpful, because they will equip you and make you more prepared for your exam. Overall, the Émigrée powerfully illustrates the enduring emotional bond between an individual and their homeland. And we're seeing conflict on a different level, because this conflict, although yes, it's external, in terms of the country, the homeland itself being divided by conflict. The speaker is divided by the inner conflict of these idealized memories versus the reality of what their homeland is like now. So the poem emphasizes these themes of memory, identity, nostalgia, and the complex nature of belonging and displacement.